Mr. Sutherland Midland was a cook in the Navy.
Yeah, that's what you were saying. Well, anyway,
He knows good food.
Huh?
I said, you're a cook, a Navy cook.
Yeah.
What kind of boat were you on, or ship?
I never was assigned to one. I was moved around on one, but not assigned to it.
Okay.
But of course, when I was on it, everywhere I went, I cooked.
Yeah.
Even on the train from Dallas to California, I cooked.
Cool.
Hey.
Public train.
Right.
Oh,
But they always had you cooking.
Yeah, I had so many of us till they had to have help feed on
I'll
everybody.
be darned.
Did you
And I
retire?
cooked all the way to California.
Did you retire with the Navy then?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, later on.
You remember what year, Malin?
No, I can't remember what years that was.
Yeah.
The whole World War.
Yeah.
What was that? 2?
40,
Well,
in the 40s.
that last one was World War II.
Yeah.
That's one I was
Yeah,
in.
40s. Yeah.
I don't think there's any of the World War I people left.
No, I don't mind. No.
You know, every year a
Long
few
gone.
less.
But 2 is what I was in.
Yeah.
Right on the start to the finish.
Well, Dad, and I talked about this in this little thing I wrote for Dad, but he spent most of the war chasing his ship, is the way I remember the story. And he'd get to the port where it was supposed to be, but it would have left the day before. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's why I'm here today, to get to talk, because he didn't catch his ship. But he did eventually catch his ship and served.
It reminds me of one. Yeah.
So
That was in the Marshall, right?
I'm embarrassed to say that I never talked to Dad about the actual areas they were
I
in.
remember it reminds me because
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that I figured if Dad wanted to bring that up, he would.
Well, I remember that. Well, reason he told us about it, or maybe, but it was because one of the guys on the ship was blowing up.
Yeah,
He
right.
never-
Well,
that's when he asked to be transferred. He wanted to go home. He said, "That's it."
that's the only
Yeah.
story that I really know of
Yeah.
from the whole ordeal, other than trying to chase down his ship,
Yeah.
was when that boat blew up. Now, I thought that was Tokyo Harbor.
No, I thought it was the Marshall Islands.
Well, maybe it was.
Dale might remember better than either one of us.
We'll have to ask Dale. That would be quite a ways apart.
Yeah.
But
So we both may be wrong.
we both could be wrong.
Yeah, he may have
I
written
just
it down.
the irony and the tragedy
Yeah,
of surviving the war and then
yeah.
being
Oh my
blown
gosh,
to bits.
He was, I think back, he was so fortunate, Lord.
Did I assume you got a letter from him after that was probably the first you knew of it, or did he even tell you about it until you
No,
got
he
it?
never came back. Yeah. Is this one new?
I've had this laptop about a year and a half,
Oh, okay.
and it's
Vicky and Nicole came the other day.
cool.
No. Yeah, Vicky and Cole. Heather was sick. She thought she might be passing a
Oh,
kidney
Heather!
stone.
Heather has just really been feeling bad.
Yeah, but it was not, as I called her Vicky later, and she said it was an infection. So no stone. I said, oh, hell, I've heard they're terrible. It's kidney stones.
Oh yeah,
So that's good.
they're supposed to be quite a.
And Cole is growing up so much. And
I hear he's 6 now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like
I
it.
hadn't seen Cole since he was 2.
Like I had an Alaska quarter. I gave him that, and then I had a thing that Mr. Brown gave us when he came back from his trip from France. And it's a what's that? All the kids like this old television show. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, he liked that a lot. Yeah. But anyway, Heather's better.
Yeah, I hate it when
She
my
Eric's
kids aren't
getting along
feeling
pretty
well.
Hmm.
Heather, she did send me a Facebook
Yeah.
message that said, Happy Father's Day.
Yeah.
Of course, it's always nice to hear from your kids. And then Eric called just before I headed over to you.
Yeah. I never really liked that girl.
Oh, well, now remember that we're on
I don't care.
Well, I don't think she likes me either, so
Well,
I've never
but she
understood
treated her.
why. Oh, are you talking about Eric? Okay, I thought you was talking about somebody else.
Oh no, I love Eric,
No, I thought you was talking about
his ex.
anyway. Well, that's a shame that didn't work out. Let's see here. I'll find you what I wrote about dear old Dad. Maybe you'll enjoy hearing my comments.
Come over here where I can see it.
Well, I'm going to read it.
Oh, you're going to read it? Okay.
You know, I took that reading class in school. You might remember when speed reading was all the rage, and they had those commercials on the radio for the Evelyn Wood Reading Dynamics class. In fact, you might remember Dad took me down. He and I took a speed reading class together for several months.
You're joking.
Yeah, it was a great father-son thing, and it was in a place off of Berry Street, and it was right above a Jewish delicatessen. And one of the big treats was stopping in there and getting some really good sandwiches, and I'd never been around a delicatessen before, so I as much enjoy. In fact, you know, I could have written so much about Dad. And now that I think, well, I'm sitting here talking to you, the things that I left out of that story I wrote. But, gosh, all the times that he and I went to play tennis.
Yeah.
You remember that out at McClellan Tennis Center? And I know the heat had to be killing him, but he enjoyed the time with me. And we started off with the rackets that you two played with 2,000 years ago or something.
Right. At least.
And then on my 16th birthday, he bought us both rackets. I still have at least one of those two rackets.
Wow,
And he and I used to play so much tennis. And, he'd be so proud of me when I'd make a good shot.
I know Dale has a bowling ball. I remember that.
Really?
Yeah.
So that was a pretty cool thing. Here's what I wrote.
Okay.
And this is Tribute to Dad, 6/18/2011. Father's Day approaches. Now, I don't have any digital photos of Dad, but planted firm in my mind is one that I would show if I did. So I thought I'd write about Dad instead of showing his picture tomorrow, June 19, 2011. By the way, the picture that I was going to show, I've showed you this picture before. You laughed. But one of the trips, and this is not in what I wrote, but the picture I would love to show of Dad, one of the trips that we made to Cincinnati, there was a brief period in the 60s where it was fashionable for women to have wigs. And you had a wig, and you remember that?
Yeah.
I got Dad, he was such a good sport, to put on your wig, and I took a picture of Dad, and he's standing there just trying to look so distinguished wearing your wig.
I don't remember that at all.
Oh,
man.
I've got the picture. It's in a Polaroid picture.
Gosh.
Now, for that trip, Dad and I both got Polaroid cameras. Now, he got the fancier one that had the bellows that came out for the zoom. Mine wasn't quite as fancy. We had matching cases, although his case was bigger than mine because it was a bigger camera.
Oh.
And
You have that camera?
well, eventually it bit the dust, but I carried that picture on many a trip, and all those junior achievement trips that I used to take around the nation. I had that with me everywhere I ever went. Took lots of cool pictures. So anyway, back to this. It says, Dad started off as a boy, like about 50% of us, and this boy grew up in a home where a couple of mighty fine folks bore him, and one of them, his dad, had a bit of a drinking problem. I never really heard to what extent the problem was, but I know that he was a functioning alcoholic who owned a successful grocery store before being called into the ministry around the time I was born. I never saw Grandpa touch a drop and never heard Dad speak evil of him or tell any stories from those days. Now, Dad had a scar on his cheek. It seems that Dad was sitting in the family car and as a lad back in the early 20s and decided to work the controls. And the car began to roll down the hill with Dad driving. until the force of gravity was matched with the equal force of an unmovable object. My brother Dale and I can both relate to taking the family car out for a drive without permission from our parents, but those are stories for another time. You probably didn't know Dale and
I don't remember that.
You all would go to choir practice. Dale had come up with a key to the car, and we would, whichever car that you didn't take to choir practice, we took out and drove.
They had 2 cars?
There was a period in there where y'all had a 68 Oldsmobile and a 62 Chevrolet.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, eventually he graduated from LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He'd been in the LSU marching band, and he played trombone. I never heard him play the trombone. It stayed in our attic through several houses. But I did hear him play harmonica a lot of times, and I loved to hear him. And one year on his birthday, Mom bought him a Honor Chromatic. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I do remember his joy over it, although it was going to be a bear to learn to play, since it played all the keys, and you had to use a button on the side to do the half notes. Did Dad ever really get the hang of that thing? It was a wonderful harmonica, but the thing about the harmonica is you got one harmonica and it plays in one key. And you can just, whatever you do on it, it's not going to be wrong because it's in the right key. But when you got a chromatic, it's like somebody just threw a piano in front of you.
I made that mistake by buying it.
Oh, but Dad, he pretended to be so joyed. We're skipping away from this story right now, but that's great. But Dad, oh yeah, he wanted to like that thing, but it was so much trouble.
It just wasn't built for him.
Well, you know what we're talking about. You got a harmonica. It's about 4 foot long, wide. Well,
it wasn't for him.
It's about 12 inches wide, and it had an upper set of holes and a lower set of holes, plus the button on the side for sharps and flats. So, and if anything, Dad would have been a blues man. You need like 2 or 3 harmonicas tops, and you just need a few, a handful of notes. So, bless his heart. I'm so glad I'm getting to read this because I wasn't sure how well that would go over. I got to keep an eye on the timer here because you can only upload these up to so many minutes. Anyway, graduation took him to Detroit, Michigan, where he met Mom and went off to the big war on a minesweeper. He fell in love with Mom through the letters they shared during the war. Dad wanted to serve his country badly, but he had a powerful uncle in Shreveport. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Where he grew up, and the uncle kept fixing his medical records so he couldn't go. Dad eventually beat that and spent the war on a minesweeper. Luckily, he spent most of the war on the wrong ship, always getting to the port where his ship was to be a day late. But he did, however, experience a horrible tragedy after the war when his sister's ship blew up next to him in the Tokyo harbor. He'd been eating French toast at the time, and it was several decades before D ever ate French toast again. Although he would fix it for us, wouldn't he?
Every time I get it here, I think about that.
Mm-hmm. Dad would not eat that French toast. Anyway, eventually the war ended, and Dad came back, and he married Mom. And he was mustered into the Naval Reserve, but didn't care too much for going to the meetings. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
They kept writing him, telling him if he didn't go, he'd be discharged honorably. And Dad wrote him back and said he liked that idea, and he wondered why they didn't take the hint earlier. Eventually, my brother Dale and I were born in Detroit, and Dad convinced Mom that Texas was the place to be, where the climate was warm and engineers were needed to design the tools for the Cold War. Yay, Cold War, because Michigan's too damn cold for me. I don't remember much from my early days with Dad at 4013 Fairfax and Ridgely, area of Fort Worth. But there are 8mm films of us having lots of fun, and I don't know if you knew, Mom, I've gotten those films out a few times. I think Dale's got them now. But in fact, somebody in the family had those transferred over to VHS tapes.
I thought one time I thought that Dale was going to do that, or what's her name? Vicky's, that guy.
Oh, that'd be Jim.
Yeah, Jim.
But anyway,
whatever.
that was cool because I can sit there and watch me in a little wading pool and Dad there in his swim trunks, and anyway,
Yeah.
I've got those kind of memories on tape, but I don't actually. I've got some memories of Dale and I walking to school in those days, and I've got a memory of, and of course this has nothing to do with what I wrote. I've got a memory when color TV came out, and we had a neighbor across the street that had a color TV. Now the picture tubes were real small. But they had this magnifying glass on a stand that you could buy to go with your small color TV. And it magnified the picture so that everybody in the room could see it. And I clearly remember going over there to see this, wow, cool color TV, which probably cost hundreds of dollars, and today, wouldn't be worth 50 bucks.
Oh, man.
Anyway, in 1962, we moved to Northwestern Hills in Fort Worth, to 3155 Cortez. All of the streets were named for southwestern things, and in particular, things done by the Spanish conquistadors and the explorers. I would have been about 9 years of age. I have great memories of us landscaping the yard, which involved creating a terrace due to the hilly terrain. You remember the terrace, Mom?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, that was a job. That's probably the first time I ever saw a piece of heavy machinery. That's not on what I wrote up close, but Dad had a guy in a tractor come and try to give that terrace a little bit of shape.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that tractor, and I was like, whoa, because I'm 9 years old.
Remember the pool table?
Oh, yeah, I clearly remember the pool table. I've also got etched in my mind a shot of Grandpa. And, he could run that pool table. And so, we had built on the register room there, and I've got one shot at home somewhere, Grandpa, and he's lining up to take a shot, and he's got that keen eye. And as I recall, he had that half-bill hat, you know what I'm talking about, with a kind of a green visor like a postal clerk might wear. And he's wearing that, and he's drawing back to shoot. He loved that table. So, and I think I also remember he jokingly, when y'all built that room on for Dale, and, being a minister now, he jokingly said something about us turning that room into a den of sin. But it was strictly a joke, the way he said it. He had a real big heart. Anyway. So anyway, I'm talking here about how I have great memories of landscaping the yard with Dad and creating the terrace. Eventually, Dad turned over all the tasks of landscaping to me, and I got great pleasure out of seeing him come home and thank me for some new flower bed I'd made or a shrub I'd moved or something. I don't even know if you remember any of that, but I'd get out there with a pitchfork, and that was the rockiest, hardest, most horrible ground. And I'd get out there and dig and plant things. And I don't remember where I came up with the money to buy the plants, because I think I did all that on my own. Probably got the money mowing yards at $3 a piece, but he would come home and he'd just be so thrilled. Of course, he hated yard work. So
his cup of tea.
It wasn't, but he did some neat things out at y'all's place in Weatherford. Of course, he was retired by then. He had all the time in the world to do it. Or so we thought. That's another story. I'm glad you can smile when I said that. Anyway, I went on to talk about fishing. Now, my first fishing trip ever was during those years. Dad took us out to one of the creeks that flowed into Benbrook Lake. I remember it so well because it was early in the morning. The sun hadn't even come up yet, and we're out there. Of course, I probably didn't like getting up that early. But and come to think, I bet you I was really excited, though, that wow, we're going fishing. But anyway, back to what I wrote. Dad had a favorite lure, and as I recall, it was called a hellbender. That may not be the exact name. There's a lure with a name kind of like that. And that was Dad's favorite. And the one he had probably belonged in a museum now, because I don't think he had bought any new fishing gear since he'd been a kid. So this was a fishing tackle box that, he probably hadn't used in over 20 years at that point, I bet. Dad would have been in his, 40s or so. Well, let's see. 1962, Dad would have been 42 years old. And this was probably more like about 66. So, I bet you he hadn't used any of that stuff since probably being a high school kid in Shreveport.
Probably
out there on
so.
Lake Vista now. Anyway, my first fishing trip ever was, like I say, doing that. Dad had a favorite lure, the Hellbender. He also liked a lure called the Lucky 13. Now, I don't know if you remember the Lucky 13, but Carol planted one of those in Dad's ear on a fishing trip years later. Got that hook right through Dad's ear. I remember.
Now that I remember
You
happening,
do remember?
But I
Oh,
don't remember.
That was Carol.
Carol. Okay.
That was Carol. It's real easy, see, because you draw back.
Oh.
You draw back to send that lure out.
Oh.
And if you're not careful, if you're not thinking about the person behind you, there's going to be about this much line out there with this hook on it, and it could be anywhere till you get the hang of it. Once you get the hang of it, you're not going to have that problem. Poor Dad, he just caught his ear. And anyway, I could go on and on about fishing stories, but I'll never forget that.
Yeah.
So I did go on to say if I had any regrets, it'd be that we didn't go fishing near often enough.
Yeah.
But the heat was tough on Dad, and so I'm not upset. But at least he took us, and I wonder how many dads today do that.
Yeah.
So.
Or have a chance.
Everybody's too busy with other things.
It's a different world.
I went on to say that I didn't mean to write that much, but I'd gotten a lot of joy out of writing. I went on to talk about how Dad was beside me when I first shot a .22 rifle at targets in Arkansas. And you might remember that Dad's .22 and his shotgun stayed with Grandpa in Arkansas.
Yeah.
But they'd been his as a boy. And then eventually Grandpa passed that back on to Dad, and that was the same shotgun that I learned to hunt on, and then I hunted with for a whole bunch of years. Dale's got it now. But anyway, you might recall we'd gone down to South Louisiana, and this was my first hunting trip. And Dad was in the blind with me. The sun's just barely coming up. These two ducks come in, and Dad's saying, "Get 'em, Don, get 'em." You remember the night before, we'd slam the door at Al's house. He had a double door, like you could bring a whole piano in at once with, and we'd slam one of my fingers in that door, and it swelled up, and it hurt like. Anyway, so it's a double-barrel shotgun. You're supposed to stick one finger in there and squeeze one trigger or squeeze the other trigger. You're not supposed to put two fingers in there, because if you do and you pull on the front trigger, both triggers are going to go off. And so it's a big old boom and kicks you. So here I am, I'm a kid. I got both fingers in there because Dad hadn't told me not to do that. It just seemed logical. And there come the ducks. And I go, boom! It probably knocked me back in the blind, but I got my duck. So Dad was just real proud of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I finished up the story with a couple of little things. And one of them was I do remember Dad coming out a little bit to watch me when I used to run track. Remember it? I ran track in my sophomore year of high school. I was horrible at it, but I had to try to do some sport, even if I was terrible. But he was also real proud when I got my first job at Six Flags.
Right.
He helped me get that Volkswagen.
Yeah.
You might remember that we bought that Volkswagen for $300 from Congressman Olin Teague.
For what?
Congressman Olin Teague. He was a U.S. congressman.
Oh.
And we bought it from him. And he was actually, you can look him up online. He was not only a well-liked congressman, but he had been a World War II vet, and I think he'd earned some honors, some ribbons or medals or something. But that's who we got that from. So anyway, I blew the engine in that car right off the bat. You might recall, I think the fan belt went out on this hot summer trips to Six Flags, and so the engine burned up because that ran the cooling fan. And Dad and I towed that thing all the way from where we lived on the west side of Fort Worth. There was a Volkswagen shop in Hearst. And Dad thought nothing of it. We hooked a rope onto the Volkswagen, a rope onto y'all's car, and towed it across town. Now, I didn't know anything about doing that, but he completely trusted me. And the cool thing was, he taught me how to think. And if you know how to, you can teach a person how to do one task.
Yeah.
But if you teach a person how to think, they can go on and do anything. And that's, I guess, probably my biggest thanks to Dad is he raised us all to be analytical. And he taught us how to think, and we can now just go out and, I know I've had a whole bunch of different careers, and I always got into them pretty easy, but it's because he taught me how to think. So that's my biggest tribute to Dad right there. And I closed it off by saying, I miss you every day, Dad. Your son, Ron, William Robert Johnson Jr., March 9th, 1920 to April 17th, 1996. That's correct, isn't it? Don't mean to make you cry, Mom, but they're happy memories.